Talking of trust, do we trust the BBC? I must ask you about some comments made by Emily Maitlis, who's recently left the BBC, and she was speaking at the Edinburgh TV Festival, and she made some very interesting remarks about the role of some former Tory figures in the BBC. This is what she had to say.
Put this in the context of the BBC board, where another active agent of the Conservative Party, a former Downing Street spin doctor and former advisor to BBC rival GB News, now sits, acting as the arbiter of BBC impartiality. According to the Financial Times, he's attempted to block the appointment of journalists he considers damaging to government relations.
Well, that was Emily Maitlis last night giving a speech in Edinburgh. What do you make of this, Mark Harper? It turns out that the BBC is basically being controlled and secretly ruled by Tory agents. She means, of course, Sir Robbie Gibb, who worked for Theresa May, and it's actually, it turns out it's the Tories that have been controlling BBC Bias all this time. If they have been doing that, they've not been doing it very well, have they?
Well, I was just going to say, look, first of all, on the point about the BBC, in my experience of both being interviewed by the BBC, but also looking at their news output, their journalists are independent and tough, and they are, frankly, as tough with Conservatives as anybody else. Her general point, though, about board members, Robbie Gibb, yes, he is a Conservative, he sits on the board, but there are also other board members with other views, and I think the BBC is a national broadcaster, and it should have on its board people who have a range of views that reflect the diversity of opinion in the whole of the United Kingdom. To say you can't be on the board of the BBC because you're a Conservative is nonsense. And to talk about Robbie Gibb being a Conservative agent, I think is just not very sensible. I think the BBC needs to have a range of views, and its own broadcasters have acknowledged in the past that it had a bit of a narrow viewpoint of people from metropolitan London and didn't actually reflect views, particularly during the European referendum campaign.
Well, indeed, what's interesting also, James Purnell, a former Labour Culture Secretary and Work and Pensions Secretary, he was the BBC's Director of Radio and the Director of Strategy for many years. Don't remember Emily Maitlis or anyone else having an issue with that.
No, and actually that's a very good example. James Purnell was a Labour Cabinet Minister. He was actually an executive of the BBC. He wasn't a non-executive board member, he was an executive. As far as I can see, he conducted himself in a perfectly proper way for an independent broadcaster. He didn't bring his Labour views to how he conducted himself, and I think that's perfectly proper. I never had a problem with him working for the BBC, in the same way I have no problem with Sir Robbie Gibb being on the board, and I just think this sort of conversation isn't terribly sensible or helpful or bring us, any further forward in the debate in the country.
I was going to say, people often say that at the end of my interviews. Mark Harper, Conservative MP, Rishi Sunak supporter, thank you very much. Indeed, 7:43 is the time. And just a quick word from Brendan Chilton from the Independent Business Network on Emily Maitlis. Lovely to go for a drink with. I mean, honestly, lovely to go to a party with, but what she said is so patently ridiculous and absurd, isn't it?
Unfortunately, there are still a lot of people that are very sad that we left the EU. And
that's what it's about.
They're not over it, and they're looking for any little thing to sort of,
The idea that Robbie Gibb, genuinely, the idea that Robbie Gibb is a secret agent, I mean, it's not that secret, is it? I mean, he worked in Number 10, for goodness sake. He worked Theresa May's Director of Communications. People know who he is. And having input, I mean, no one ever complains to the BBC if it's someone who's clearly Labour or Lib Dem or Remain. And some of the things that Emily Maitlis has said very blatantly, we know her politics. I'm pretty sure I can tell you how she votes, and she was a political presenter.
I agree with what Mark said. I have no problem with people from different political backgrounds working in different parts of the media or any other profession.
I'd like to see people from different backgrounds, maybe different views. As someone who walked through the BBC the day after we won the Brexit referendum, I'm pretty sure I know exactly how. I honestly, I may as well have been. I mean, the Wicked Witch of the West. Honestly, in terms of being an agent, I'm not entirely sure you could be a sort of secret agent if you're
on the board.
Well, you're on the board publicly, and you were the Director of Communications, Theresa May, when she was Prime Minister in Number 10, and you're well-known Tory supporter. I find that quite bizarre. Why is this an issue? There's no doubt at all that we've had plenty of people who are Labour supporters, Labour ministers. We had only a few years back. James Pennell. He'd been a cabinet minister, Labour Culture Secretary and Labour Work and Pension Secretary, and he was not on the board. He was an executive. He was the director of radio. He's also the director of strategy and digital. He was helping decide things. Virtually every appointment they make is somebody who has expressed openly Labour supporting or Remain supporting politics on social media for years. But there's one bloke from the Tory party on the board, and that's an issue?
Well, it's part of this wider attempt to, remove any people that disagree with the mainstream or with the sort of consensus in an organisation. I think having a variety of people in an organisation, from left to right, business, public sector, is a good, healthy thing.
And the important thing is that we know what their views are. And that's the thing, when BBC talks about diversity, they normally mean we need to hire more trans people or someone with darker skin than the executives. But actually, they don't want any diversity of thought. I mentioned earlier, I walked through the BBC the day after we won the Brexit vote. Still one of the greatest nights of my life. Just a wonderful thing to wake up to that morning. And I walked through, and genuinely, if the devil had walked through that office, they would have got a warmer greeting. People were looking at me like, I think I might have heard hissing. I'm not joking. They would have spat on me if they could. They were shell-shocked because they all voted to Remain, and none of them had ever met anyone who was a Brexiteer who apparently wasn't Nigel Farage. And they were just absolutely gobsmacked that it happened. But it's just, I just find it so bizarre, this idea, if the BBC has got any bias, the idea that it's a Tory bias. Has she watched any of the output? To be fair, no one watched Newsnight, so maybe
this is the thing. Some of these people, they're in their own bubbles. They're so consumed in that sort of circle of people they mix with, they don't realise how absurd what they're saying actually is. To accuse the BBC of acting for the Tories in any sense, as people probably know, I'm a sort of progressive, soft-left kind of guy. I would not in any way say the BBC acts for the Tories.
Yeah, exactly. There we are. You heard it there first from Brendan Johnson. Up next...